Thank you. Happy trails to you
And you can sing the good ship lollipop.
till we meet again. Until I figure out how to find the off button. Happy trails to you. I don't see it anywhere.
You kill
I'll
me.
love you till the end.
A
I
little
don't
Roxy
see
Hart,
that
ladies and
button.
gentlemen. I
I,
didn't even get to talk to you about that.
I still don't see the button. Oh, got it. Got it.
Okay.
Bye.
Of course, everyone knows who Christie Brinkley is, right? Sports Illustrated swimsuit model multiple times, Billy Joel's Uptown Girl. But there's so many things that you probably don't know about Christie Brinkley. Like she had a very abusive biological father until Don Brinkley came to the rescue and loved her unconditionally. That she's had a number of love affairs, one that ended in tragedy, two where the guys were just awful people, it turns out. She's also incredibly talented. She's a great artist. She can sing. She speaks fluent French. She was Roxy Hart in Chicago on Broadway. I mean, who just is able to do that? I've gotten to know Christy a little bit because we both have houses on Long Island. And I've been amazed at how incredibly sweet, charming, and funny she is. So I was personally very stoked when she wrote a memoir called Uptown Girl and pretty much told the whole story of her life. And I was super excited to actually have a conversation with her, so much so that I spent about an hour and 25 minutes talking with her about her memoir. I think you're going to fall in love with Christie Brinkley after you hear this conversation. Not to sound cheesy, but I'm kind of obsessed with her myself. So here's my conversation with Christie Brinkley about her new memoir, Uptown Girl. First of all, thank you for doing this. I'm very excited to talk to you. You know what a huge fan I am of you.
Oh, well, likewise. I mean, Katie, I have to say, you're doing such an amazing job right now with what's going on in the world, and everybody seems like so afraid to speak up, and you're speaking up in like you're bold and you're amazing, and I applaud you and I thank you.
Well,
And
I love getting your DMs, and I'm always like, Christy's on it. She cares as much as I do. So thank you for that. Because the whole team that's here listening to that, nice comment, Christy. They're the people who are helping me every day.
Yeah,
So,
thank you, team, because boy, oh boy, we are up against it.
Christy, the first question I have for you is why now? Why did you decide, you know what? It's time for me to write my life story.
I'm 71. If I don't do it now, when am I ever going to do it? Um, I had started it before a while back. I started it. Actually, Stephen Gaines was working with me a little bit on it. And he immediately said, the title of the book is Uptown Girl, period. Not, no, nothing to discuss. And then I was like, I don't want to do this. Like, who wants to read a story about me? And so then it sort of, pooped out. I just couldn't I just was like, I don't need to do it. But, you know, like I live here in the Hamptons and I go back and forth and I have drivers and stuff and they start asking me questions. And I'm like telling all these stories and they're like, I hear all the time, you should write a book. That's a great story. You should write a book. And my dad, who was a writer, he was a television scenarist. He said to me, Christy, if you don't do anything else, promise me you'll write about your years in Paris, and that could be a whole book. And in fact, when I went into to HarperCollins, I was like, I know I have a book in me, but part of me thinks that the book is a Nancy Meyers movie. And because I've got the real estate, the wardrobe, the crazy exes, and And once you get out of the divorce, it's funny, I mean, especially my last one. It like there's so much to laugh about that one.
Even though at the time you weren't doing a lot of
Even though at the
laughing.
time I felt like I was going to die. Like it
Well, I
was.
should point out, for people who don't know you, you've got an incredible sense of humor, this extraordinary ability to laugh at yourself. And when you were deciding, I'm going to put my life down, what what were the animating sort of ideas that you had? Did you say, I'm going to be just brutally honest? That's what I did with my book. My husband said, do not write a book unless you can be totally honest.
And a great title for your book that like delivered that message too.
What's the point of kind of sugarcoating things after you've lived a life with, good, bad, ups and
Yeah.
downs?
Yeah.
What did you think about when you said, I'm going to write my book? Like what was your guiding principle, I guess?
Yeah. Well, I don't even know if I really had one. I had to decide if it was going to be a Nancy Meyers comedy or it just, a sweet story of my days in Paris. And then once Lisa Sharkey wrote me a letter, the publisher at HarperCollins, and she said, and her letter was so great, and she convinced me that my life story needed telling, and so I started it actually with a writer, a guy, and it didn't sound like me at all. And I also have to mention, I have kept journals for 60 years, and my journals, like I had started like, sort of cleaning the things up, and I came across my journals. That was really the thing that said, I've got to tell a story because my journals, like I left to Paris to be an artist. And then when I became a model, I had no time to be an artist. So my art shrank and I got a rapidograph, which is a very fine point pen. And I would do these little drawings in my journal that, like Beulah's restaurant in Eleuthera, and the whole crew sitting around the table. And I think someday I'll do a big canvas with this and I'll paint it. But my life hasn't slowed down to be able to do that yet. But someday I'll paint that. um, Meantime, that kind of became the book. Like, all right, let's just tell some stories, and then working. Then I started working with a female writer because the man, the guy that I was working with, it was like at one point he wrote something where I said crap, and I thought I haven't said that word. Like the only time I ever actually said it out loud was when I played Roxy Hart on Broadway, and she used to say it. But so then I got this great Sarah Toland who I worked with, and uh, and we started sort of culling the stories, like what is going to make it, because at 71 your life just doesn't fit in a book. It just does not fit in. There's so many adventures that I couldn't put in there. Maybe another book
Yeah.
someday.
Well, you
But
put a lot of great stuff in there, so many great stories. And you're right. I mean, you had a treasure trove of source material, including letters you'd written to your mom and dad
yeah,
from Paris.
yeah,
But you also had to, I think, excavate a lot of childhood memories that I think were
yes,
really painful. And I felt so terrible about your childhood up to the age of 8. Your biological father was this guy named Herb Hudson, and he was a real jackass and
yeah.
abusive to you. Talk about what that was like, because I was really upset to read what you had to endure as a little girl. He terrified you.
Yeah, writing the book, there were lots of parts of the book that I didn't really want to write about. And I can get choked up even thinking about that because, I I just didn't really want to ever write about it. But I guess I also didn't really want to think about it. I never did think about it in my life because my mom also didn't want to think about it. And once we met my dad, who the greatest dad in the world,
Don Brinkley.
John Brinkley. Once we met him, everything changed. But we also pretended as though the other life never even existed. And because of that, I think I had buried a lot of those memories. So when I did have to try and remember and sit back and remember the things that were popping into my head, which were things that I didn't want to remember. Unfortunately, the things that stood out were his belt, his whipping me with it, his things like even one of my other childhood memories when I was singing into the microphone, I remembered that. I think because it was also there was pain attached to it,
And
and
he would wash your mouth out with soap. And, you would basically be terrified about him coming home from work. You said he used to look for excuses to
yeah,
punish you. And,
yeah.
looking back on it, I'm curious if you, and I know you and your mom just kind of basically blocked it out. But do you have any better understanding, Christie, about what made him the person he was and why he did that to you? And did he do the same thing to your brother?
Um, he, you know, I I really don't know. I remember all I can remember about my brother was that he got a lot of really, really bad headaches, which my mom thought was because he was stressed from Herb Hudson. But I can't really speak to what, he felt. Um, but I my mom would mention things every now and then, occasionally. And I used to say to her, because she didn't have anything nice to say. And I used to say to her when I was old enough, I'd say, you know what, Mom, I don't like thinking that I'm made out of part of that horrible person. And I don't want to feel like I'd rather just not hear about it because then it makes me feel like, am I going to be mean like that? Am I going to be evil like that? Um, so even if she did feel like speaking to me at that moment, I didn't want to speak about it. So
Right,
we didn't really psychoanalyze what was going on with him. We didn't spend much time talking about it. All I can surmise is that, I really felt like my life with him was this, as I described, this black and white movie uh, when the film breaks and then you're in a new phase of the life, like uh, I have a little memory of once we went to Disneyland in California, and I really, really, really wanted to go on that auto ride where you get to drive the cars. And we
right,
got to a point in the line where we were waiting. It seemed like we were waiting for so long in the line, and they left me to hold the place in line. And then they went to go get some drinks or something like that, right? And as soon as I got to the place in the line where I could see the cars, I got so mesmerized by the cars, I forgot to keep moving. And I was just like staring at this car, like, are my feet going to fit the pedal? And what do I do when I get to that turn? I was really like, and I'm going to speed on that part. I was like really into it. And and suddenly I was like broken out of my reverie by him grabbing my arm and going, why didn't you move? You didn't move. The line moved. We were behind those people way up there. And so he pulled me out and said, you're not going on. And like those are the kind of memories that I have of my childhood with him. So no wonder I didn't want to think about it. And so,
yeah.
you know,
But everything changed when you were 8. He gave up
yes,
his parental rights, and Don Brinkley, who really is your dad, for
Yes.
all intents and purposes,
Yeah.
stepped in, and you couldn't understand why your biological father was giving abandoning you basically. But in retrospect, I'm sure you thank God that that happened.
Yes. It at the time, I it was confusing. I would say it was just confusing because on the one hand, I really didn't want to see him on his visitations. It was so it was a relief in a way, but I also thought that I was unlovable, you know?
Yeah. And even if someone is a horrible father, there is that biological pull, and you always want to understand why they don't love you, right? As much as anything. So I'm sure you just felt
Yeah.
this terrible confusion about why he was so willing to give you up.
Yeah, well, I also lived with the constant threat of um, that he was going to send me to the orphanage. And I don't know about you, but I loved Shirley Temple movies. And it seemed like Shirley Temple was always being sent to an orphanage, escaping from an orphanage or whatever. And so I thought that was like a fate so terrible. I was truly terrified of that, of being sent to the orphanage. I remember when he came in the room, I just kind of hold still, like, don't do anything wrong because you'll end up in the orphanage.
How do you think, I don't know, I'm sure you've thought about this, but how do you think he shaped you ultimately? I mean, thank God Don Brinkley stepped in and was the total opposite and loved you
Yeah.
unconditionally. But you must think back at those extremely formative years and young life experiences and wonder, gosh, what do you think that did to me as an adult?
Yeah, I think I think that luckily, my most formative memories, I think, came because my life was so vivid and so full of life and color. And I mean, Don Brinkley was just the most amazing man, the greatest man. Truly, he was like a saint in a way. I mean, at the end of his life, he had scoliosis and Parkinson's, and the two are a terrible combination because it crunched him down so he really couldn't breathe, and it ended up that he couldn't talk because he had to get a feeding tube, he had to have a breathing, like it was so awful. And he never, when he chose to say a word, he never complained. It was a rigmarole to get the word, but then it would be make you laugh or make you smile. And that was what he did. Like, he was unbelievable, unbelievable from the very beginning. He could have a deadline, for a script due, but if I needed his help with homework, he was there for me. I'm so choked up because I'm so moved by my good fortune. My parents were amazing. And so I think I made a conscious choice to escape that part of my life and to leave it behind and not even try to think about, not deal with it, not try and psychoanalyze it, but instead focus on the great part of my life that blossomed in front of me, this great technicolor adventure that he gave our family, this joy. And he had an apartment in Malibu on the beach on Old Malibu Road. And all of a sudden we were, able to wake up and run downstairs and be at the beach and, find pebbles and stones um, and there was another rock we called Pier Rock and Volcano Rock a little further. And we had that's where our forts were, and of course in the pilings behind the houses and stuff. But it was like this whole new world. And the hillsides behind us, before Pepperdine, before all of that, I knew every nook and cranny, every canyon, every little waterfall, every little thing. It was just pure magic. It was amazing. So rather than psychoanalyze, like, you know when I first started writing my book, and I tell the story about the day I flew over the cornfield, the first writer that I was working with really wanted to psychoanalyze that moment. And I said, no, no, life is so full of things that we don't understand, that it's like, I don't want to see backstage at Disneyland. I just want to see the magic, I just want that part. Like,
The cornfield was when you were escaping mentally, and you
mhm,
would imagine yourself flying over a cornfield to escape your terrible abusive father. And but I'm glad you included that, because I think, in contrast, your dad Don gave you everything, and it made you appreciate the
yeah,
gift of unconditional love
yes,
that we should all be so lucky to have, that
yeah,
sadly so many people aren't. And I feel the same way about my parents, that I never for 1 second of my life doubted for 1 nanosecond that they didn't love me unconditionally and completely. And
yeah.
that, I think you realize as you get older what a gift that is, and how sad it is that not everyone has that.
Oh, yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
I want to fast forward, though. We have so
Yeah,
much to cover, and I know we don't have
yeah.
tons of time, but we hopefully have more time to talk about how you went to Paris at 19. I think another great thing about you that I've known, but not the extent of it, is how artistic and creative you are, and how that really drove you for so much of your life. So you go to Paris when you're 19 years old,
Yes.
and tell us about going to Paris, and becoming an artist. And I know Alexa describes you, Alexis. Did I just say Alexa?
Alexa.
Alexa, that's what I thought. I know Alexa describes you as kind of bohemian, but what prompted you to decide, I'm going to Paris, I'm going to be an artist, I'm going to live this life?
I I just always felt it. I knew it. I always just had this dream that I would live in a little garret in Paris. I would wear my beret. I would,
There's a very cute photo of you in your beret, I know.
yes. And I, you know, and everything was pointing me towards that. I remember the film Les Parapluies de Cherbourg came out, and we went to
The
see it,
Umbrellas of Cherbourg,
The Umbrellas of Cherbourg,
with
and
Catherine Deneuve.
Catherine Deneuve, and my dad got me the album, and so I would put the needle back and I would sing along. Autrefois, j'aimais une femme, mais elle ne m'aimait pas. On l'appelait Lola autrefois. Et puis, j'ai voulu oublier. I was just like, I loved the music. I loved the language. And I just had to get into the thick of it if it was the last thing I did. And oh my gosh. And one day I did an acting class, right? Just this, it was on a whim. And the acting teacher said, okay, you're going to have an argument in a fake language. Go. And me and the other person on stage, and I started going, no, and he said, no, 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 Christie, not a language that you speak, but a fake language. And I said, I am doing a fake language. And he said, no, you keep speaking French. And I said, I am. And he said, yes, because I speak French perfectly. And you're saying, so I was like, That's it. I must have been French in another life, you know. Um, so I don't know. But when the opportunity presented, and California was no longer big enough for the two of us, I had a breakup with my boyfriend, and so I decided I'll show him. I'll, you know, I'll fly away to
And
Paris.
you did. You flew away to Paris, and I'll talk about, I'm going to talk about your first love or your first marriage in a moment, but it was in Paris that you were discovered by photographer Errol Sawyer.
Yeah.
Um, Tell me how he discovered you and how that happened.
Well, I was living in the garret under the rooftops. I had fallen in love already with Jean-François, a French artist, an amazing artist, really, really great. And he got drafted into the French military. And so we got this little dog to keep me company. The little dog was sick. So I would put the little dog in a little panier, and uh, over my shoulder and sort of, go into the telephoning office because in my little garret, my little atelier, I did not have a shower or a bathroom or a telephone. So I went a couple blocks away to the bain public, the public baths, and I used the telephone a couple blocks over, and I would call the vet. And I was calling him almost daily, and because my dog was sick. And this day, as I was rushing in to call my vet, I literally smashed right into Errol Sawyer, the photographer who had seen me there before and had a client who was looking for a California, sporty California type girl. And he was like, "That's the girl at the phone office. I'm going to go back to the phone office and see if I see her." And sure enough, as fate would have it, I came in that day to, you know, um, bring my to make the call, and he said, "Are you a model?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Well, then you should be." And I have a client, and he started telling me about it, and then he gave me his name and number, address, I should say, because he also didn't have a phone. And so he said, "This is my studio," and it wasn't too far from me. And he said, "Please, please trust me. Come, let's do some photos. I'll take them into the model agency. I'll take you into the model agency." And I was like, "Really? Okay." I wasn't sure if this was a line or what. But then I was speaking to a friend of mine, Stephanie, who went to the Lycée Français de Los Angeles with me. And she said, "No, no, no. I've seen his name on a byline. I'll go with you. Come on, let's go." And so that's how it happened. And the
And the
day he
rest,
took
as they
me into
say,
the,
is history. Life changed
yeah,
as you wrote on a dime. But, you also talk about how your so-called flaws, which makes me laugh, but, that you were too curvy, that you had chipmunk cheeks. You write, "I was told my cheeks were too round, my body too curvy, but it turned out those were exactly the things that set me apart." I do remember when you arrived on the scene. I mean, to describe you as curvy is laughable to me because you have the most beautiful physique. But at the time, it was a bit, your body was a bit of an anomaly in terms of what models kind of were looking like,
yeah.
right?
My whole look was, like, of course, I immediately assumed that when he took me into the model agency, they would make me look like them, right? Like I was like, "Oh, what will they do to me?" Like, um, I'm picturing, they'll do something to my hair, they'll whatever. But yeah, that was the thing that set me apart. So sometimes the things that you worry about are the things that make you different and end up to be your key to success. And I was so lucky, the timing, because modeling just prior to that had been very like elegant, kind of long, lean, thin, elegant uh, beauties. And then suddenly it was, let's get physical, physical, with that whole movement of athletics, people starting to work out at home with Jane Fonda.
Right.
And I mean, I worked out at home with Jane Fonda. I, I did so many Jane Fonda tapes. The one in the purple that she wore purple, that Alexa found this doll that looked just like it. And she called it Jane Fonda. It was her Jane Fonda doll. And we had to take that doll all over the world with us on tour, by the way. And Alexa learned to count because I put that on. I was like losing the baby weight, or I was losing the baby weight for the next 5 years. But I would put that on, and Alexa would count. She'd go, I'd say, count to 10, Alexa. She'd go, 1, 2, 3, make it burn. 4, 5, 6, and more. 7, 8, and back, make it burn.
You're such a good mimic. So I know, Christy, that 4 years and 10 months after Errol Sawyer, or you ran into Errol Sawyer,
Yeah.
um, you were on your first Sports Illustrated cover, and that was in 1979.
Wow. Yeah.
What was that like?
I had no idea. Like I really was clueless. Like they threw a big party for me, and I literally called the agency to say, I don't think I can go to that party. I already told somebody else I'd be at the and they were like, "What do you mean you can't go to the party? It's for you." And I I just had no idea. Like it's like, oh, okay. I was doing my makeup in the car on the way there, sort of wet hair and, like just throwing myself together. By the third one, I had hair and makeup people. I had a stylist getting me clothes, but I really didn't know. And then everything that I loved about, like, I was a very reluctant model, I have to say. I don't even know if I had a chance to write that in my memoir, but I used to love sitting at a cafe in Paris, for instance, with my little sketch pad and be able to just blend in, and like not be noticed. And then, like, Sports Illustrated, after Sports Illustrated, you get noticed. And I wasn't like 100% sure about that whole part of it, you know?
What was that like? I mean, I feel like you're very outgoing and very funny and super friendly.
Yeah,
But
I mean, it wasn't like it bothered me, but it was different. It was different. But people have always been very nice, I have to say, because some people go, oh, it's awful. And it's like, no, it kind of really isn't. Like, people just want to say hello, or like, especially after I was with Billy, then it was a whole different level because, uh, you know, if they thought maybe it wasn't me, like maybe they thought I was taller or shorter or, whatever, thinner, thinner or younger. But then when they'd see Billy, it would be like, or if they'd see, we confirmed each other's existence, was identity, was who they thought maybe we
uh-huh.
were. And then sometimes if we were just trying to be like a family having dinner, it was a little bit harder because you could have your mouth full, be just about what? Oh, mm, oh, mm, okay.
It's
Do I have
also
spinach in my teeth? you
hard for
know.
your kids too, right? It's sometimes hard because
Well,
uh
Alexa just thought that we were really popular. Like, she just thought like everybody likes my mom and dad. They have a lot of friends.
let me you bring up Billy. So obviously you've had such an interesting life in terms of your loves and your marriages. And I wanted to just kind of talk about that because you mentioned Jean-Francois. That marriage, as you said, he was a remarkable artist. You were, in a way, two peas in a pod, I guess, at the
Yeah.
time. But as your fame increased, and I think this is the tricky part of fame. I think about
Yeah.
this like for people who are in marriages when they're both actors,
Yeah.
or one person has more success than the other. That really derailed your marriage to Jean-Francois in many ways, didn't it?
Yeah, but as opposed to other people, it was because he had so much character, so much like he was such a great guy that he didn't want to, to spend my money. And I was like, it's not my money. We are a team, like I wouldn't be able to do half these things if I didn't know that I was coming home to, my wonderful Jean-François, so no, we're a team, and we help each other, and we put it in, but he knew, like exactly, and he didn't want to, he became uncomfortable with, like, no, I can't really afford a plane ticket right now. And the more opportunities that I had to experience places and things and see things and explore, then he started to become more uncomfortable with it because he couldn't afford it on his dime. And he was successful in what he did, but what he didn't earn the same kind of money that what I did. So I mean, his dream was to work for the New York Times, and he got to do that. And but he just, was like the opposite of a lot of guys in a way that, most people would be like, "Oh, sure, buy me a ticket, let's go."
He didn't want to feel like he was taking advantage of you.
Yeah, he didn't want to feel like that, and
And
so, but it did become a bit of an issue because even though it was a nice way of doing it, like he was nice about it and great about it, I just wanted him to be comfortable with it, and let's go. Let's keep exploring and doing things.
and you have to remember this was, a number of decades ago
Mhm.
where this, I think, was a much bigger issue than it is today. I still think
Oh,
it
yeah.
exists, but it was very unusual for the woman
Yes.
to be more financially secure than the man. And I think
Yes.
it was, after a lot of cultural conditioning, really hard for, I think, men to handle it. It still, I think, can be, but I
Yeah.
think we're much more enlightened now than we were back then. Because as I said, this was when you were 19 years old
Yeah.
and in your early 20s. You
Yeah.
met Olivier Chandon. You fell for him hard. Tell us about that love affair, Christie.
Uh, uh, Olivier, he was such a great guy. He was so extraordinary. From the moment I met him actually the night at Studio 54, the first time I ever went to Studio 54. And they were having a party for me for Sports Illustrated first calendar, and Ford Models and Sports Illustrated combined to do this party for me at Studio 54. And as I walked in, he walked over and congratulated me on the evening, and I recognized his accent, and so we started to speak a little bit in French, and then and he was just, he was very handsome. He, had broad shoulders, and he was tall, and he was really handsome. And I was like the person that they wanted to take a picture of or whatever, because it was the
Well, it
party
was your
for me.
party, right?
And so
Yeah.
he didn't want to hang on to me. He was like, go, go, everybody wants you, go. So I went on, but I was kind of thinking about, where did that cute guy go? And then, sure enough, the next day I got flowers, the most beautiful giant bouquet of flowers with the loveliest note in French that said, avant que ces quelques fleurs s'évanouissent, j'espère te revoir. And I was like, before these few flowers fade, I hope to see you again.
Wow.
I was like, oh. And so then I called my friend Maury Hobson, who I call Hops, and I called Hops and I said, Hops, Hops, that guy, Olivier, sent me flowers. And he's like, wait, Olivier Chandon? And I said, yes, yes. And he said, oh my gosh, Christie, he's a count. I said, he's a what? He said, he's a count. I said, well, what does that even mean? You know, he's adorable. And he sent me flowers and wants to, like, it also mentioned he wanted to take me out for dinner. So I said, so I'm seeing him later. And it just started like that. And he, like everywhere we went, he was so worldly, you know, he spoke every language. He could speak, obviously, he spoke English really well. He spoke French. He spoke Portuguese. He spoke Spanish. He was like brilliant. He listened to classical music and it moved him and he loved it. And he loved the ballet and he knew all the ballerinas and they all knew him. And he loved art and he loved life. He was a liver, like so was Hops, my best friend at the time. They were both of them. I'd say, you guys are livers, you know, you like to live it up. And they just were the type of people that like to dive in, you know, and immerse themselves in life. And I loved that. And so I loved going everywhere, you know, with Olivier. He was, at the time that I met him, he was actually working for Otis Elevators, but he wanted to be a race car driver. It was his lifelong dream. And
Whoa, wait. The Count was working for Otis Elevators?
he was working for Otis Elevators. He was like selling accounts or something, you know, super boring, he thought. And uh, every day he would like drive out of the city to some place like
That just
north of the
doesn't
city.
square with everything you just told me.
I know. But he really, you know, he'd come back and he would like talk about like, you know, how he wanted to do this other thing. And he started pursuing that. And you know, we went to the different races and I was like, don't do that. That's too risky. But he, you know, it was funny because he had a fear of dying. So had to face it. So like he wanted constantly was doing things to to face the fear of dying.
And so in 1983, he did.
Yeah, he did. And it was
How old was he, Christy?
uh he was, oh my God, it just flew right out of my head. He was way too young. Um
We can look it up. Don't worry.
yeah, I
How old was he, guys?
27.
that's what I was going to say is
Wow.
27, but he it was such a shock, you know, like for a person that young and that full of life and joy and uh, just somebody who was just, you know, so immersed in each and every day, just, you know, as soon as he'd get off work. And he turned pretty quickly. I mean, you know, that was just in the very beginning. And then he started, you know, pursuing his dream. And I mean, on the one hand, it was his dream that killed him, but it also, you know, gave him so much joy doing that. Um, and then, yeah, it got him.
At
He
just 27, which is so, so young.
way too young, way too young. And it was so shocking to me the the day that it happened. Well, I don't want to say too much because, you know, it's such a sad story. I mean, it's it's all the circumstances surrounding it are confusing and so sad and so awful, um and it's just, I don't know, I still can't really find the words, you know.
Do you think that you all would have gotten married and lived a life together?
Well, we were, you know, we spoke about like having a baby someday, but not at the moment because we were both still, you know, trying to, you know, get our careers stabilized or, you know,
Right.
grow our careers. And um he was so enthusiastic about it. I mean, I went with him to a race in Chicago. I went with him to Las Vegas, and we would wake up in the morning and you hear the cars buzzing on the track, and it was just like this electricity, you know, that was charging him. Like, let's go, let's get there. And when he got, you know, had his suit and his racing suit, and um, I went with him to one of the things when he spun out on the track. And I begged him after that because we all took off across. We were in some place in California at a, a speedway, and it was kind of deserty. And all of a sudden, he hit the dust, and the dust plume went up, and we didn't know. And we just shot out of there, and we were running as fast as we could to get to him. And after that, I was like, please don't do this anymore. Please give it up. It's just too dangerous. It's just too dangerous. And then, you know, the one thing I'll say is the last day that I saw him, we were in a little bit of an argument, and I didn't kiss him goodbye. And I'll regret that for, you know, my whole life. Like I always say, don't ever have an argument and leave. Like, don't ever do that. Like, we all mean too much to each other to ever, like, let the other one leave the room angry or upset, you know? So in life, don't anybody listening ever do that. Always make sure that people that you love know how much you love them.
In a way, you were still grieving this loss when you met Billy
Mhm.
in St. Bart's. I love that you have that photo from the night you all met. And
Yeah.
it sounds like he really was your salvation in a way.
Yeah.
And I read that you thought his name was Billy Joe, and you didn't really know that much about him. And yet,
No.
I mean, it your relationship turned out to be really magical. You know, and I know that you write about how you were hurt by these media characterizations of like Beauty and the Beast, and that bothered me too. I thought that was hurtful and so shallow. But you know, you are this perfect looking woman, Christie, whether you like it or not. And Billy, you know, was this sort of dark, you know, haired guy, not super tall, with these kind of, you know, deep set eyes and kind of this moody look. And what was it that attracted you to Billy? Obviously, I know you say that he is physically hot and intellectually charismatic. Um, and that there was this chemistry between you two.
Yeah, it's
But
funny because Katie, the first night that I met him in St. Bart's, I I looked right past him, and he had told me that he had seen me in St. Martin before we both arrived at the same time. And he said he was like standing there doing like his album cover poses, hoping to catch my eye. And I looked right past him then too. I didn't notice it. He said, "You kept walking right past me." And I was like trying to be seen by you. And that night, the word was Billy Joel. Billy Joel's at the bar at the PLM. Let's get there. So we get there, and I was like, where? Because there was this sunburned, bright red guy, with his hair kind of like frizzing from the humidity or whatever, and a kind of like Hawaiian, vacation shirt. And, but so look wise that night, it wasn't, I thought, all right, let's see. But he was so funny. I knew that night that I wanted to be friends with him forever. I was like, oh, I'm definitely going to make sure that we stay friends, because we laughed, and the next night we all went out, the whole gang of us, we all went out for dinner, and again we all laughed. I wrote in my journal, and then we both went home with the wrong person. But after Olivier died, and well, even before Olivier died, Billy had called a couple times, and we were on the phone laughing and being friends, being each other's friend. Then after he died, he waited a little bit, and then he called me and he said, I know what you're going through, and I just want to say I want to be there for you in any way I can. If you need me, if you want to be distracted, or if you want to talk about it in any way, shape, or form, I'm there for you. And he was really sincere about it, and really, he really was my friend, and we were friends at first. And I remember being um, bothered by his hair and his shoes. And I literally said to my mom, I'm seeing this guy, and I really like him, and he's really makes me laugh, and we have so much fun together, and but it's like he's very, very different from from guys that I've been with before. And I just like he wears these sort of little pointy shoes, and this, you know, and she said,
And
honey,
his hair.
she said, you can change a man's shoes, you can change a man's hair, but you can't do anything about the rest. So if the rest is good for you, go with it. And so I said, yeah, well, he's got a good heart and a good sense of humor. And she said, go with it, and then I just, like, a couple little tweaks, and he was super hot. you know
And where was he in his career at the time? I mean, he was really, this was, I mean, listen, Billy's body of work, like it's, you can't compare it to anything. I mean,
Yeah.
to really all the greats. And I know a documentary is coming out about him, which I can't wait to see. But
Yeah.
professionally, he was really, was he on the cusp, or had he already exploded when you met?
I immediately, after I met him, I went out and bought my first Billy Joel record. And I remember I fell in love with his voice, and I was playing the songs over and over again. I loved Vienna, and that song, James. James, we were childhood friends. Nobody knows that song that I'm talking about, but his voice was very sort of McCartney-esque on it, and I used to love Paul McCartney too. So I don't know, I was like blending them together or something, but I loved it. Just made me like love him even more. Listening to the music over and over was like hypnotizing. And then, what did you ask again?
I was asking about where he was professionally, because I
Oh
guess
yeah,
when you
yeah.
met him,
So
had Piano Man come out?
I didn't know where he was professionally, because I didn't know any of his work prior to that, but he was professionally just starting a new album, and which was amazing because, you know, I think he had like one or two songs, and then he was writing as our relationship was growing, and I would be in the studio and he'd be singing, these songs, and I was right there through the whole process. And I mean, that was pure magic, just to be in. I love music. To me, I love the arts, but to me, music is the art that literally paints the air around you with that can propel you, like to, to, that can make you get up out of your chair and dance, or it can remind you of a special moment. It just takes you places, and it becomes, the soundtrack to your life. And I felt like in my years with Billy and Alexa, I've been lucky to have like a home full of beautiful music playing all the time. There was somebody at the piano, just filling the air, and ah, it was amazing, amazing.
The relationship ended because of Billy's drinking. And you're very honest about this, Christie. And I'm curious how he felt about that and how hard it was to be this honest about
Yeah.
the crumbling of your marriage and your relationship.
Well, I think, and I don't want to speak for Billy, but um, I I also did am in his documentary. I did, like, I mean, I don't know if I'm on the cutting room floor, but I did things in his documentary, and he said, "Don't hold back. Say whatever you want to say, whatever you're comfortable with, whatever you need to say, whatever am. I understand, and I'm not gonna be mad or anything." He said, just whatever, you can say what you need to say. So um I think that he's capable of doing that now, because i I know that in part of his healing was knowing what you did. Like when a person drinks to a certain point that they don't remember what they did the night before, I think I think that it's helpful in a way. I don't know. I mean, I certainly am not out to hurt anybody, but I think that you need to know what you did hurt people,
And he wanted you to be
That's,
honest, not only in the documentary, but in your book.
yeah,
And you all
absolutely.
have a really nice relationship now, don't you?
Yeah, I mean, I'll always love Billy. I always will. We were together in such formative years, years that really shaped both our futures. We had some of the best years of my life.
And you have a daughter.
My firstborn. So that was really, really special. And, Alexa, I always say to Alexa, Alexa, you got us for the first 10 years of your life, without any other siblings to pull our attention away. So she really got, and we really got to have fun with her.
And I think it's interesting. I watched a video of you and Alexa going through photos together, which I really enjoyed. And sounds like she's a lot more like Billy than she is
Oh, yes.
you.
They are definitely two peas in a pod. Alexa, when she was little, she always categorized people in colors. And she had red and green people, which she and her dad are red and green, and blue and yellow people. And I'm a blue and yellow person. So I'm like, oh, like ocean in the sun, like, like cozy Christmases. And she said, yes, pretty much like that. And um, so intellectual and not
No,
intellectual.
that's not true.
And
I think you give yourself
yes.
short shrift. I think you're very smart. And I think people have a hard time it's easy for people to say those who are as beautiful as you are ditzy, but you
Hey,
know, and
Katie, I have had the hardest time trying to remember to talk into this thing that I'm supposed to,
that's okay. You're
the little
doing
thing right
fine.
here.
You're doing
The whole
fine.
time I'm like, oh,
It's
oh
okay. You're
yeah.
doing fine. But uh I know I have to wrap up pretty soon. I swear I could be like I could go all Joe Rogan on you, Christy, and like talk for 3 hours. I'm not going to, but in your acknowledgments, you thank your divorce lawyer who said you have a bad picker.
Yeah.
Um, moving after Billy, you did have a couple of relationships which did not turn out the way you had hoped, to say the least. I know that one was with Richard Taubman. Am I pronouncing his name
Yeah.
correctly?
Yes.
He was your third husband. I know that you say you quote unquote trauma bonded after you were in a helicopter crash in 1994. Um, and I remember when that happened and how scary that was. But that relationship uh, ended up being incredibly disappointing. You say it was chaotic and draining financially and otherwise. Was that kind of your classic rebound relationship, you think, Christy? Because I know at one point you thought after the helicopter crash, this was Billy's chance to be a knight in shining armor and come and rescue you, but he didn't.
Yeah, I actually had met this guy on a
He who
previous,
shall not be named.
yes, yes, he who shall not be named.
I have a few of those.
Yes. And I I met him and he was almost like too good to be true, but he was kind of working me, I guess, everything that I love, he was into and on the verge of doing. And so he talked a good talk. And but I actually went on, oh, this is what I was going to say. I actually went skiing because I wanted to show Billy that he was getting, like he could lose me, I wanted to like remove myself, and we we were separated, but I was kind of just sitting there at home in the Hamptons, so I wanted to be like out and about separated and give him, and I thought maybe he would see that and be like, oh, I need to really pay attention now and, you know, clean up my act and go after her. That's what I was hoping for by going to Aspen or to Telluride on my couple of ski trips that I was doing. And, but he didn't take the bait. So, but there was another guy that did show interest uh, and eventually caught my attention in a big way.
You all ended up having your son, Jack. And I know that you married Peter Cook, your fourth husband, in 1996. And you write for a number of reasons, primarily because I felt both a sense of urgency to find Jack a father figure and terror at the thought that Ricky might swoop back in if I didn't. This is after you all got divorced. Uh, I said yes when Peter asked me to marry him later that year. I should preface that question by saying that Ricky got in touch with your biological father, Herb, and even said, quote, I'm going to walk away from you and the baby, just like Herb Hudson did. What an asshole.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, first of all, that's pretty psychotic.
It was, I couldn't believe that it was like a time machine, like somebody had reached back into my past and plucked this person out and brought them, inserted him into my life in a way that was so unexpected and cruel in a way, like just the that I just couldn't even believe that this was happening. Like, how do you even, it was so diabolical to even come up with that concept.
So you marry Peter. You all looked on the face of it like the perfect couple. He's handsome, blonde. He adopts Jack, right? Which is great. You have Sailor, your daughter, together. And then he ends up basically having a thing with this teenage girl in the Hamptons, right? Who worked at a toy store.
Yeah. Yes.
I mean, Christy, I have to agree with your divorce lawyer.
I
You
know.
have a bad picker.
I know. And yeah, it was a very bad pick on my part. I really did. Uh, those last two marriages, in reading my journals and stuff, I just look at myself and I just, like during the third one, I was like, why didn't I get out of it faster? Why didn't I like see that coming? Why, you know, and then this one, I just felt like I felt so stupid. I just felt like so stupid that I didn't see it because it was going on along. Was Stuff was going on the entire marriage, you know, the entire marriage. And I didn't see it. I didn't see it. And I'm very restricted on what I can say, and also, I think people are so sick of it because it was in
Such
the
tabloid
newspapers.
fodder, right?
It was such fodder. I mean, they literally had, I don't even know if I can. I mean, it was just. I just feel like, the less I say, the better.
Yeah.
But I can definitely tell you that it was extremely trying, and the to get a divorce from this guy was next to impossible. It was just the most exhausting, draining nightmare. And what I uncovered was a nightmare of you know stuff. And I just am, I didn't even want to bring it up. Like, I didn't even want to have to write about it at all. Although it could make a funny Nancy Myers movie.
There's there's always Nancy Myers.
Could, you know, like with distance now, oh man, there's stuff there that would just be hilarious. Hilarious. But it wasn't, I, I couldn't laugh a lot while it was going on.
I'm
I must say,
sure
very, very, very trying.
very trying and so public and so mortifying for you. I felt
Mm.
for you so much during that period of time in your life. And where are you now? I mean, do you feel happy and content? I think I know the answer to
Yeah.
this, Christy.
Yeah.
And do you feel like, gosh, I would like a partner? I know you don't feel like you need a partner at this point in your life.
Yeah. Whenever something really, really exciting, great, happy, whether it's like a magnificent sunset uh, or something, anything, an exciting trip or something, that's when I feel like I wish I could share this with somebody. but I very often, my house is full. I, always have, there's always at least one of the kid home with a group of friends. There's always friends, it's very busy place. And so I'm very content and grateful for what I have. But when there is a very magical sunset, sometimes I feel like going, oh, yeah, there's nobody there. you know, that's a little sad, but that's it, you know.
You describe uh, Olivier Chandon and your friend Hops, who I've never met. So I'm just referring to him again as real livers, not the
Yeah,
organ, but the attitude. And
yeah.
I feel like you are too. You continue to stay so engaged in the world. You're always, you're entrepreneurial, you're politically active. You are, I think, living your life to the fullest every single day.
I
And I
am.
really admire that about you.
That is, I've always felt a sense of gratitude. Always. My mom and dad raised me like that. But after, my death defying life, I feel like I kind of have gratitude on steroids. And I just am like so grateful when I wake up in the morning and I've got a new day to dive into. And I cannot even leave my property, but feel like, just so ecstatic to be in the day and whatever it is, whatever that I get into, I, I enjoy it. I just do, whether it's watering my house plants. I'm looking at my little tree here. I am very happy to have each
Well,
day.
I'm so glad you wrote a book about your life. We've only scratched the surface of everything that you've experienced, and I highly recommend people read it. I just think you're a very special person. I feel, even though we don't know each other super well, I admire you and feel connected to you and appreciate you. And
And I love the fact that I know that if a band strikes up a song and we know the backup, that you'll be up there with me singing backup.
I will. And yeah, and I just think you're a great person. I really like you. And I was interviewing somebody about the Pope this morning. I said, what do you think his legacy was? And and this Jesuit priest said he was just a really great person, and
Yeah.
he was just really, really loved. And I don't know, I feel the same. Not
You
that
know
I'm
why?
comparing you to
Because
Pope Francis, but
but the Pope loved everybody. The Pope like literally loved everyone. And I think that's why I loved the Pope, because I loved his love. And that's what we all need to do right now is we all need to just say, stop everything. Let's just love one another. Let's just stop this madness going on in Washington. Let's just stop this, and let's just go back to let's just love. Let's try and be friends with everybody. Let's just, I don't know. I just really feel so strongly that it's time for love because love is the strongest thing in the world. We know that it's a fact. And it's time for love to prevail. It's time.
Christie, thank you. Speaking of time, you've given me a lot of yours. So thank you. My team is probably like, Katie, when is she going to stop? She's been
Sorry,
talking to
guys.
Christie
Sorry.
Brinkley, no, for like an hour and a half, but there are so many things I wanted to talk with you about. I hope I get to see you in person soon.
Yeah, call me when you're out
I,
and let's eat.
okay, let's do it and
Okay.
sing and dance
Yeah,
and all the things.
and
Christie,
sing.
thank you and good luck on the book tour.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
All right, big
Thank you for
kiss.
your
And
time.
I promise not everyone's going to take this long to talk to you.
And keep up the good work, Katie.
Okay, I'm trying, honey.
Love
I'm
your,
trying.
I love
Keep
everything.
DMing me all the stuff you send me.
It will.
Okay.
Okay.
I'll talk to you soon. Okay,
Bye.
bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.